Welcome to the Pursuing More podcast. We're here to encourage and empower people to pursue more of what God desires for them. For us, pursuing more is the intentional opposite of settling for less. In these podcasts, we're going to bring you stories and testimonies of people who are experiencing more of God and whose lives are being transformed. Transformed from being complacent, frustrated, stuck, and settling for less, to experiencing hope, growth, change, and pursuing more of that in their lives.
Well, welcome. I'm Bill Bowers, and I'll be the host for this episode of No Longer the Same. And today we have Brittany with us, and she's agreed to share her story and some of the journey that she's been on over her lifetime, but more specifically just the last few years. So thank you so much for being here, Brittany.
Thank you, Bill. It's an honor to be here. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it was so exciting. Last week I got to hear a little bit of your story, and I'm excited to have you here today for you to share more with our listeners, because I know as they hear your story, they're going to hear things that are going to resonate in their own lives, and hopefully things that will bring some hope and encouragement for each one of our listeners. So why don't you just start out by telling us a little bit about yourself?
I was born and raised in the Pacific Northwest. I come from a blended family and really what was a broken family. I traveled back and forth from home to home between Tacoma, Northeast Tacoma, and Port Orchard, living with my mom and my stepdad, and then my dad and my stepmom. I come from alcoholic parents. I come from a lot of narcissism and manipulation and sadness and unhealed wounds. That's where I come from.
Yeah. So it sounds like a little bit of a rougher upbringing, maybe not the stability that a lot of folks maybe get to experience in their growing up years.
Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect way to say it, right? It was unstable. Not stable by any means, not with what one child wishes to have, you know?
Yeah, so in that growing up time, how was there any relationship with God or church, or was religion part of your growing up experience?
Yeah, it's kind of wild. My mom grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, actually, and she was kicked out of the Kingdom Hall when she was 18 and pregnant with my older sister, and so she got into the non-denominational Christianity, and we grew up going to church. I grew up believing in God. I believe in what the Word has to say, but it really got distorted, I would say, through life experience. We went to church on Sundays, and we kind of bounced around from church to church, and I didn't find a home church, I would say, until I was in high school.
So what was that like going to, say, junior high, high school? What were those years like for you?
Junior high and high school looked like youth group on Sundays, but it really took a turn for the worse when there was a lot of physical abuse. There was some sexual abuse that took place with family members of mine, and all I wanted to do was escape that. There was no stability, like we had mentioned at the beginning. I ran away from home a lot, specifically to a friend's house. I was never, like, it wasn't a cop call situation, or my parents didn't necessarily know where I was. One specific household that I felt safe at. And yeah, with that physical abuse, that was my way to communicate with others. And so I got kicked out of school a lot. I got suspended. I got expelled from school for fighting. And I found pills and I found alcohol. And the first time I did that, it took like 6 morphine pills at one time. I was at Patterson Skating Rink in Federal Way. I don't know if people know where that's at, but I spent a lot of my weekends there. And it was off to the races. I loved the way that it made me feel. I felt good in my own skin for like the first time in my life. And it was really a rocky road from there, I would say. It didn't I wouldn't have called myself an addict at that moment. In that time, today when I look back, I knew that I was an addict from the beginning. I was always living in this restless, irritable, discontent state of being. And man, what I would say now, like that hopeless state of mind and body, right? Like this hopeless condition.
So progression from there, transition, you're getting out of high school, or did you finish school? What did it look like to step into those young adult years?
I hadn't lived with my parents since I was in middle school. And so when I went into high school, my sister got custody of me for the most part. It wasn't legal on paper, but my mom gave her money to take care of me. Man, the cop at my high school and the security guard at my high school, they had my sister's number in their phones for the days that I skipped school and all of that, because I followed chaos. I loved chaos because I didn't know different. I didn't know stability and peace of mind and peace of spirit. I talked about this God that I had no reliance upon. I actually ended up getting pregnant. I was 18 the beginning of my senior year, so I could sign my own absence slips. I moved back to Port Orchard with my son's dad.
So at this point, that was a little one. Did that bring about some stability then and a purpose to stay focused, or
I wouldn't say it was stable. I moved from my son's dad's place that we got together to my stepmom's place and back and forth, because when things are hard, you run. Like, that's what I knew. When things were hard, I run. Yeah, I tried to get some stability in his life. I became a student when he was about a year old. I worked in the daytime, and then I went to school for dental assisting. It was 5 days a week. By the grace of a God that I didn't give credit to at that time, I graduated, but there was many a times where I showed up to school drunk, and I don't even remember what that looked like, getting through school, except for that I was loaded. I was a functioning addict and alcoholic at that point. I thought I was doing my best at showing up for life, and that people didn't know what was really going on underneath. And I mean, that was it. Like, I was in complete denial at that point. I didn't have a problem, that I could stop and start whenever I wanted. And the reality is that I was obsessing more over drugs and alcohol in those moments than I was about being a good mom, a nurturer to my child. I had always wanted to be a mom that my mom was not, and I was going down the same road.
Yeah, it's interesting how many times the patterns we saw growing up, our intent is to live a different pattern, but we find ourselves maybe outside of Christ living the same pattern again. That's part of my story as well. So at what point, like at some point, this got unbearable, or crisis happens? What changes things for the better or the worse?
When we talk about crisis, I think there was an endless amount of crisis that took place in my life. And the difference back then was that people didn't hold me accountable. Like, I had done almost 22 years of counseling throughout my life, whether it had been with professionals or in a different sense with mental health professionals, but like also my pastor and that kind of stuff growing up. I was never held accountable for my actions. I was able to play victim a lot through all of that. It was always everybody else's problem. It was always everybody else. The harm that was caused to me was the reasons why I got away with the things I got away with. Yeah, and I never understood the depth of pain that I caused other people. So this disease of alcoholism and addiction and thinking I'm being a good mom, and that this PTA mom, and the reality was I couldn't even show up to PTA without having a few beers in me beforehand, right? It got worse. Like, it got to the point where I couldn't get my kid to school on time or pick him up from school on time. He was left at the bus stop. And this incident happened where I was in a past relationship, and my ex actually shattered my elbows. And I just found myself completely really hopeless. And through that process, I found methamphetamine. It was the boss universal, man. The moment that entered I was this functioning alcoholic and addict prior, but the moment that I took a hit of methamphetamine, it owned my soul. Like, I could not escape that. That was my mental obsession for 2 years straight. And through that process, it wasn't enough that I couldn't pick my kid up from school on time or get him home, and my parents telling me we want to help you, or your kid deserves better, or your kid deserves a mom that loves him and that is sober, and all that didn't matter to me. And so I go on this journey of methamphetamine for 2 years, and through that process, I lost my dental assisting job. I fell asleep over a patient. I didn't fall asleep, I passed out, and came to with my boss waking me up over a patient. And so I lost my job, and even that wasn't enough, right? These external circumstances were not enough to get me sober, or to stop what I was doing, and to change my behaviors or turn towards God or anything.
Right.
And so I reached out to my best friend, and I hadn't talked to her because you go into this isolation place and you don't show up for life at all, right? And you're just stuck in a room getting loaded. Right. And I reached out to her, and I just said I need help. This is what happened to me, and I don't know what to do, and I need help. And so hopeless. And she said, I'm sorry that happened to you, but I've been going to AA for the last 3 months, and I'm sober. And I said, this is a woman that I partied with for years, but if it worked for an alcoholic like her, and this alcoholic is telling me that for 3 months she hasn't put a drop of anything in her body, let me try that.
Yeah, there's hope.
There's a little bit of hope there. This little glimpse of it was just a glimpse, because at that point I didn't see a light at the end of the tunnel. So I mean, from there, I wish I would say I was done, but I go to this 12-step meeting on New Year's Day, and it was a room full of women that had felt the way that I had felt. They had been where I had been, and they had done the things I had done, and they had joy, and they had a belief in a God, and a reliance upon this God. And that was the difference. I always believed this external being, this spirit of the universe, but I did not have a reliance. That little glimpse of hope kept me coming back to those rooms, and not a single one of those women judged me. And they remembered my name, and they embraced me with open arms because they believed that if it could happen for them, it could happen for me too.
Yeah, it sounds like you got two things from those women: is people who believe in you and have hope for you even when you don't have hope, but also that unconditional love.
Yeah.
Right? That they continue to love you even though you're not in the right condition yet. That unconditional love is your condition doesn't matter. They still love you and have hope for you. So yeah. So eventually that works, right? You step into it, and what's the spiritual part of that journey? At what point did you decide, okay, I am going to trust God or rely on God, or what language you would use for that?
It was easy for me to turn to this God because I grew up with this childlike faith in the God, right? So I didn't struggle with this God concept of connecting with him, but it was a second at a time. And there were times when I was on my knees screaming to God, just get me through this. And then that second passed, and then it was a minute at a time. But every second that passed, this connection grew with this God. And it started with simple prayers. Like, God, help me. You know, my story is not like, I didn't find it in a church building. I found it in the gutters with drunks and addicts just like me, still suffering from the disease that I've recovered from.
I mean, and that's where Jesus comes to find us wherever we are. Right?
Yeah.
He doesn't wait till we come through a building and come all put together and ready to go. Then he meets us where we are.
I wish I could say that I learned that in the church building, but that's not where it came from, you know? And I get to see miracles and blessings and God working on a daily basis.
Well, that's a great segue to, so where are you now? So you're, 2 to 3 years past that?
I actually celebrated 3 years clean and sober on February 3rd.
That's right. I saw the pictures of your sister bringing you flowers, right?
Yeah, and me bawling my eyes out. My life looks completely different today. So I didn't get to see my son until I was 5 months clean and sober. This grace that my son's dad and his wife showed me, a grace I didn't deserve. And I get to be a mom today. Yeah, life looks different today.
Yeah. What's the transition from what to what?
Man, there's a few.
Right.
Like I was selfishness and I was self-centered. And today I get to be a servant of God. I was dead and God brought me back to life. So, I'm a miracle.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, it literally is death to life, right? I mean, it's a life that was death, and it actually deals death to those around you. Mm-hmm. Now you're life, and you're alive, and you're bringing life and hope to those around. So where are you serving now? What does that look like? What's life like now and being able to serve and love and care for others?
I have a sponsor in my 12-step program. I have a service position with my 12-step program that keeps me really busy and focused on other people, and the honor and the privilege to sponsor other women that are going through this same process and down similar paths that I went down. And I get to work at the Puyallup Food Bank. So what that looks like is that we're on the front lines at the Puyallup Food Bank with individuals in crisis. And every volunteer that comes through there is there because they have a heart of service too, right? They're there because they want to be there. And so I now have the privilege of helping other individuals, not just through 12-step programs, not just through drugs and alcohol and all of that addiction, but people that don't know how they're going to pay their light bill. People that don't know where their groceries are going to come from. People that don't have family and relationships and connections inside their own circle that come to us for that. I get to be a part of that today. And so to live a selfless life of service is, yeah, I still suffer from this selfishness and self-centeredness, but I get to focus and make a choice today to focus on others and to witness and be a part of reconciliation and the beauty of community and the love of Christ. Like, I get to see that all of the time. And so it's not just through working these 12 steps that I work and showing up for women like today that are still drunk, you know what I mean, and still feel hopeless. It's in all aspects of life. And it's so much more than just drugs and alcohol. These people that come from broken families, I know what that feels like.
I want to ask, what compels you to keep pressing in and keep pressing on for more? What motivates you to get up and, as you've said, show up every day?
I used to do it in the beginning of my recovery journey because I had to, and that's what kept me sober. But the more you participate in it, the less it becomes a chore. You do it because you're filled with that Holy Spirit. Like, I feel God in the morning and through the day and when I go to sleep at night. I do it because it brings joy in my life and because it's not about me. It's about what is God doing and how can I be helpful in that sense.
Amen. Yeah, that's exciting. That's exciting. So what would you say to people, maybe women specifically, that are in some of the shoes you were in over those years? What would you say to encourage them?
You're not alone. There's a way out. You don't have to continue to do what you're doing, and you don't have to do any of it alone.
So, where do you go from here?
You know, I'm a full-time student. So I graduated with my associates this last spring and did a direct transfer agreement to Central Online. And so it's just a lot of studying and a lot of showing up and just keep trudging the road, you know. We'll see what that looks like, a bachelor's in social service with a minor in family science. Yeah, with the goal to hopefully work with some kids that were just like me.
Any last words of encouragement for our listeners out there?
As long as you're breathing, there's hope. What I know today is that God doesn't make too hard of terms with those who seek Him. Even when we don't feel Him, He's there. Just turn towards it and know that you're not alone.
Amen. So good. Such a great encouragement. Well, thank you again, Brittany, for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Bill. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Pursuing More podcast. We hope you've been encouraged through this episode, and if you're curious about other resources that Pursuing More offers, you can find it at pursuingmore-nw.com.